This has been the year of journeys and pilgrimages for Trinity Church. If you've at all been keeping up with our Trinity communications over the summer, you know that in the space of a little more than 2 months, we've had 3 groups launch out on journeys to far from familiar places, all for the sake of growing and sharing their faith. Our youth group traveled to Kenya, not so much this time to offer help in a struggling corner of the world, but to build new relationships with the boys in an orphanage school, trading stories of their very different lives, building bonds of understanding, learning who Christ is for them. A few weeks later, our young choristers and adult choir, some 80 strong, set out to offer their luminous music in 2 of the great English cathedrals. They journeyed there to give the gifts they give us so extravagantly week by week. They went also to broaden their own experience of the Anglican tradition of music and the Anglican faith. And they went also to deepen their own faith in those holy places. Then, just 2 days ago, I and a hearty band of 38 fellow pilgrims returned from a deeply moving journey to the Holy Land, in which we explored the places where Jesus taught and healed and called his disciples. We explored the tangled streets of Old Jerusalem, where people live not only by different faiths, but in different centuries. We visited the Dome of the Rock and the Western Wall, sacred sites for our sister faiths, Judaism and Islam. There were so many highlights: singing Silent Night as we stood before the spot in Bethlehem where they believed Christ was born, sitting in the pre-dawn desert for an hour of silence as the sun slowly rose, then celebrating Eucharist, feeling the Spirit moving in our midst, striding down the Mount of the Beatitudes with Jesus' great teaching ringing in our ears, and then peering amazingly into a tomb that was empty, that maybe for the first time made the resurrection seem real for so many of us. And of course, there was more: the political complexities, the tragedy of the Palestinian situation, the difficulty and pain of Israel and Palestine unable to make their peace. All of that was part of the journey. I would guess that if you had much of a conversation with any of the pilgrims, those to the Holy Land, but also those to Kenya and to England, they would tell you that in some ways they are different because they made the journey. I know the Jerusalem pilgrims saw Jesus in new ways, but I know also that the people who went to Kenya saw the world now in a different way, as did our friends traveling in England. In our first lesson today, we heard one of the pivotal stories of the whole Bible, the story of Abraham. Not only does this story lie at the foundation of our whole biblical story for us as Christians, it stands at the origin of the 3 great world religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham has been called the father of monotheism, the conviction that there aren't many gods, which was what people believed for so long, but one God at the heart of everything, and that one God's one desire was to bless the human family. Taken together, more than half the world's people take their spiritual bearings from this mysterious man named Abraham. Well, the story tells us Abraham was born in the village of Ur of the Chaldeans in what's now southern Iraq. He and his wife Sarai moved to Haran on the border of Syria and Turkey. And then when Abram and Sarai were 75 years, the announcement came we heard in our lesson today. Well, God says to them, out of the blue it seems, go. Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. I will make of you a great nation. And amazingly, Abram and Sarai, despite what we might call their mature ages in the mid-70s, pulled up their stakes and ventured forth, having no idea where they were going. All they had was a promise from this mysterious God, a promise that they would become a great nation. And nation for them meant becoming a vast, extended family. And we know that Abram and Sarai, who became Abraham and Sarah, are seen as the parents of the whole Jewish faith, the whole Hebrew people. A great nation grew from this mysterious call. What could this mean, though, for them in this moment, these people who could not conceive a child ever, even to that moment? Well, the story unfolds over 12 chapters in the book of Genesis, and it's strange and messy. If you're looking for models of good family values, I would skip most of those chapters. But Abraham and Sarah, as they came to be called, stay on this mysterious journey, called by what seems to be a pilgrim God, to go on a journey to who knows where, but called to trust that they would be led to where they need to go. They move around twice more, and by and large, they settle into a life until they are in their 90s, when all of a sudden they learn from God something new, that Sarah will become pregnant with a child. A little stretch for someone in her 90s. She laughed when she was told it, but so the story goes, she gave birth to one child, a child named Isaac. And Abram had another child named Ishmael. And Ishmael became the progenitor, the father figure for the Arab people, and Isaac the progenitor for the Jewish people, the two great strands flowing down. And it all starts with a couple of relatively old folks who say, okay, we'll go. And the whole journey since for the people of Israel, and then soon on for the Christian people, is that they were called to be travelers, pilgrims as a way of life, never to put roots down and stay only there, but always to be ready to go where this God would lead them, where this God would call them. Centuries after the life of Abraham and Sarah came their descendants who became slaves in Egypt, and it was a man named Moses who called them into a new journey to freedom we call the Exodus. Then go many generations more, and you come to a child being born in a stable in Bethlehem who will spend his own lifetime traveling place to place, calling no place home at all. As far as he was concerned, the road was where he belonged, responding to what God would be calling him to do. And so in the gospel lesson today, we hear the same words that Abraham spoke. Go. Jesus says to his disciples, go out. Go into the highways and byways. Travel light when you go. No purse, no bag, no sandals. Depend on the hospitality of the people who will take you in. Tell them about the kingdom, but keep moving on the road again and again. To follow Jesus, it seems, means somehow to be an itinerant, a journeyer, a pilgrim, always ready to learn and trust along the way. It means not settling for the conventional wisdom of any one place, but to be ready to respond to their Lord. The God at the heart of those three great faiths calls God's people to be travelers, to be moving forward, to be open and ready for what's coming next, to be ready to welcome in those who will travel with them, to be spiritual adventurers along the way. There's a very fine book from a few years ago called Abraham, The Journey of the Three Faiths, where he says each of the three faiths took a different piece of the Abraham story to make it central. For Christians, it was the fact that Abraham and Sarah made their journey because of faith and trust. For the Jewish people, their response to Abraham was faithfulness in the way they practiced their faith. For the members of the Islam faith, their faithfulness came in submission to the God, but for all of them, they were to be a pilgrim people, responding to a pilgrim God. I confess I've never been quite so eager to move along as this story seems to invite us to think about. I've never been one ready to drop my net and follow Jesus quickly like that. I've wanted to think about it. I've never been one to walk out of the house with my spouse beside me and say, okay, we'll go wherever we're meant to go. I tend to overthink big decisions in my life, tend to analyze and add up the good and bad, the pluses and the minuses, to get counsel, to go on retreat, to do all of those careful things. But what we're hearing in Abraham and hearing in Jesus is the call is always to go deeper, always to be open to discovering a new dimension of God's love, of who we're called to be. And funny, when you go on trips, the 3 trips I've just described, but your own trips, surprises happen. You meet people you didn't know you'd meet. You see things you would not have imagined. We, making this pilgrimage to the Holy Land, despaired over the political situation there and only found our hope when we worshiped with a tiny Palestinian community who, in their small numbers compared to our larger numbers, sang much more strongly, with much more enthusiasm, with a conversation about faith that inspired us all, their conviction that as the Palestinian numbers are shrinking, they are called by God to bear witness to the love of Christ for everyone. We couldn't have scheduled that experience. It came because we were willing to be on a journey and let this God come and show and teach. Can't we think of times when we needed to take the plunge and go? We were wrestling with a sense of being stuck in our life, but we were so pulled in by the comfort of where we were, we didn't want to risk taking the plunge and going out. Or maybe once you thought your world had fallen apart, you lost a friend or a spouse or a job, and it felt like you were 85 years old yourself and that there wasn't much more to do. But somehow a new call came. Someone spoke. You heard something stirred, and you found yourself at a time in your life when you could not have imagined it, discovering a new path, a new moment of opportunity, a new way to give, a new way to know God. And when it comes to the life of faith here in 21st century Boston, we as a community here are called to be pilgrims following a pilgrim God. A God who wants us to be spiritual adventurers and risk takers, ready to learn new things and see our lives in new perspectives, and to spot God in ways we hadn't seen God before. The world now is as uncertain, at least, as it was in the time of Abraham, and is moving at breakneck speed so much faster. Christianity is changing before our eyes, and it's time to embrace this pilgrim journey of going together along the way and listening and learning for what God has to show us as we make our way. I'm hoping that this year at Trinity Church will be a significant year of pilgrimage. Only some were able to jump on airplanes and go to foreign lands, but we all can step onto this journey together, to make our way through the Hebrew Scriptures together, to listen and learn and talk about who this God is and what this God is all about, and what does it mean to listen to this God in this kind of world and time together, we pilgrims traveling. And we will learn new things and feel new things and see new things if we will make together our climb, what we've come to call our climbing up Mount Kilimanjaro. What's on many people's bucket list of things to do. This is our parish's Kilimanjaro, to go together to discover who this mysterious pilgrim God is for the 21st century in the middle of Boston. We'll see some stirring sights as if we were climbing up. We'll also see some strange and even confusing things as we ask all the questions and learn together who this God is here and now. This year will, of course, have plenty of other journeys, not just this year of the Bible. We'll keep on growing in the ways we serve the vulnerable of our city. We will learn new ways to invite seekers to walk with us this pilgrim's way. We'll work together for a less violent nation. I heard recently, not so long ago, of an Old Testament professor who had a reputation for coming up with good advice packed into memorable one-liners. And here's the one that struck me. You won't know if you don't go. If you don't take the risk, if you don't open yourself, if you don't offer yourself, there's no possible way to move from where you are. Jesus always assumed that people would only figure out what he was about if they would come along and watch and listen and begin to imagine themselves into this kingdom he was talking about. There is no way to discover new things and stay spiritually still. My hope is that this can be a journey of pilgrimage for this whole community and friends from far beyond. And I hope that we will take some chances with our lives, our faith, our commitments. There are things we need to see and know that we can only experience as pilgrims on a journey together. And here's the thing. You won't know if you don't go.